From the men who brought you basically a sports show, if your football fix wasn't met on Thursday night, it's time for an additional slice. This is basically a football show right now. Let's go!
Here's your ball game. Nick Marshall stands in, steps up, going to throw downfield, just a home run ball, and it is tipped off. And Lewis got it on the deflection. Lewis is going to score. Lewis is going to score. Lewis is going to score. Touchdown Auburn. Touchdown Auburn. A miracle in Jordan Hare. A miracle in Jordan Hare.
On the way. No, returned by Chris Davis. Davis goes left. Davis gets a block. Davis has another block. Chris Davis. No flags. Touchdown. Auburn. An answered prayer.
30-40 daylight. Headed for the end zone. Touchdown, Florida State. A 100-yard return. Mason steps outside right, breaks the daylight. Still going. End zone. Touchdown, Auburn. Not quite yet out of miracles. No. Throw it. End zone. Jump ball. Touchdown. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it's football season. I'm Zach. Along with me is Greg. And Greg, it's the second season of basically a football show.
I tell you, it went by quick. It doesn't seem like it was that long ago that we were doing the wrap-up with the Super Bowl show and all that. Here we are again, already.
Doing the wrap-up with the Super Bowl, had a little draft. Of course, we take a break from off-season football coverage because we're not animals. I'm really excited for games to finally start this weekend. I got a high school game on Friday that I get to go to. College football starts this weekend. We got the NFL in a week.
Oh, back up. No. College football starts tomorrow. With Georgia Southern
right.
and Abilene, I think. Is that right?
Well, actually, I mean, if we want to take a step back, college football started last week.
Oh.
There was a big game between Sam Houston State and Eastern Washington.
Well.
I think that was up on the red turf.
There you have it.
Yeah.
But yes, it's underway already then.
Well, Division I football bowl subdivision.
Yeah.
That starts this weekend. Of course, you have so many great matchups on the weekend.
We've probably just talked about as much about the FBS division as we're going to all season, I would guess, just now. FCS, excuse me. FCS, yes. We've probably just covered it, so hope you enjoyed that.
Yeah. No, there's some great games. Actually, the games do start on Thursday. You got my Arizona State Sun Devils hosting powerhouse Weber State.
Oh, yeah.
It'll be a tough one there in the Valley of the Sun. Texas A&M, South Carolina to kick off the SEC schedule.
Oh, that's not a bad. That's a good game, yeah.
That game launches the SEC Network.
Oh, yes. I forgot about the SEC Network. And I think they just made a deal with DirecTV, so I'll be able to watch them. So that'll be cool.
And then that night, Boise State and Ole Miss play in Atlanta in the Georgia Dome.
That might be an interesting matchup, too.
Yep. But before we get to the games, we have to get to the conferences. And preseason poll, of course, the poll's not as important this year as in years past as we go into the first year of a college football playoff, which we've all been waiting for. 4 teams, not the optimum solution, but it's what we're going to get. They're going to play for the giant beer tap at the end of the season, the new college football playoff trophy. But at first in the AP Top 25, your reigning champions with 57 out of 60 first-place votes, the Florida State Seminoles. Of course, last year, the national champions beating Auburn in the Rose Bowl. James Winston making his sophomore return, where I'm sure he'll get his fair share of crab legs thrown his direction.
Oh, yeah.
As he scores many a touchdown this year. And Florida State, it's easily the class of the ACC. They're number one. There's only 3 ranked teams in the ACC total. You got Florida State at 1, Clemson at 16, and North Carolina at 23. And Florida State's schedule it's a walk in the park. The only 2 ranked teams on the schedule right now are number 16 Clemson and number 17 Notre Dame. Both those games at home. So Florida State, I don't see any way that they're not in that 14 playoff at the end of the season.
Well, let me ask you a question. They're ranked number 1. They're the class of the ACC. But here's my question, and I'm going to take this back to last year for a second too. Are they still the best team in college football? Because look, they won the national championship. They beat an SEC team, but I still am not entirely convinced they were the best team in football last year. I'm not so sure they were as good as Alabama, but that is a discussion you could have forever and ever and ever. But do you think that, going into this season, are they on paper and talent-wise the best team in college football?
I think offensively for sure. Jameis Winston on his own, unless he has that sort of sophomore slump, and I mean, winning the Heisman Trophy as a freshman, you saw what it did to Johnny Manziel last year. He had all the pressure, all the focus on him. And of course, the off-season things don't exactly help him. Neither did the rape accusations.
Right.
There's a lot that could come around on him that could crumble it. But I still think Florida State, they may not be the best team in college football, but they're easily the best team in the ACC, and they're going to win. They might just go undefeated. Maybe they lose a game somewhere. They trip up for some dumb reason. But they're not going to lose in the ACC, I don't think.
Their only real competition, honestly, is, like you said, Notre Dame, who I think is at 17 probably is overrated, and Clemson. But now Clemson can give you a game.
But Clemson's going to Clemson. We know what Clemson does.
But they don't do it till later in the season, and Florida State has them at Game 4. So Clemson could still be the mirage that Clemson is every year and when they face Florida State. But, again, it's in Tallahassee, so I don't see it. Yeah, and they're going to – maybe Miami gives them a fight later in the season. But other than that, I just don't see anybody on there. It's, they've got Florida.
But Florida's a dumpster fire.
They are.
Florida's a mess.
A lot of people think they might come back this year, but I tell you, they're a disaster. So
I do not see that. No,
I don't either. I've read. But
look at it. They got NC State, Wake Forest, Syracuse.
Well, and then
they're in easily the worst division in the ACC, the Atlantic Division, and Louisville comes over with Bobby Petrino at the head.
Yeah.
So, who knows what you're going to get out of Louisville.
A lot of points, but I don't think enough defense to beat a Florida State.
No.
And they do that now. Their first game is versus Oklahoma State, which isn't exactly a pushover.
Yeah, at Cowboy Stadium.
But really, looking at their schedule, I have to agree, it would be a bit of a shock if they didn't walk right through this undefeated.
Yeah. The rest of the ACC, like we mentioned, Clemson, Clemson actually has a pretty hard schedule. They open up at Georgia, and then they go to South Carolina State. I thought that was South Carolina. I was going to say, whoa.
Yeah, that would have been a tough start.
But they open at Georgia, just like Georgia opened in Clemson last year, and Clemson beat them there. Then they go to Tallahassee in Week 3. They host North Carolina, the other ranked team in the ACC, number 23 there. And then they go through a pretty easy schedule and place number 9 South Carolina to close it out like they do every single year. So Clemson could get off on a bad foot early with 3 ranked teams in their first 4 games, and then could put the nail in it at the end of the year with South Carolina.
Yeah, they get out to a bad start early, and then we know how they finish, so it could be a tough year for the Tigers.
Rest of the Atlantic Division, like I mentioned, Louisville's got Bobby Petrino coming in, but that's really the only intrigue there. BC, not great. NC State, not great. Wake Forest, not great. And Syracuse, I still don't know what they're doing in the ACC, but they're there.
Yeah, it's a interesting choice. Well, we know why they're there, because of the money and because it's a super conference. That's what they're trying to turn it into anyway.
Over in the Coastal Division, North Carolina is the early favorite, the only ranked team on that side of the ACC. They have a couple tough road games. They go to Clemson, they go to Notre Dame, and then they also go to Miami. And what you wouldn't have said, you would think I'm nuts telling you this is a hard game 2 years ago. They go to the defending division champion, Duke Blue Devils.
Right.
Duke coming off a 10-win season.
Right.
That's just weird to say.
Well, yeah, and if you remember, we were really on their bandwagon going towards the end of the year last year.
Who wasn't?
Yeah.
There's no reason not root for the Duke Blue Devil football team.
Yeah, but the question is, I guess, with Duke is, are they capable of – how much do they lose in the offseason, I guess would be the question. But Yeah, you don't look at Duke on anybody's schedule and go, well, that could be a tough game, but now you kind of have to, based on last season. But the Tar Heels, maybe Georgia Tech might give them a little bit of trouble. Miami's always going to be tough, but yeah, the ACC. I mean, really, after Florida State, it's
exactly.
I don't know that a lot of these teams could win the Big Ten, and I don't mean that because the Big Ten's tough, folks. I'm saying that because I don't know that they're even that good. So we'll see.
Yeah, Duke. They do have a pretty easy off-season schedule before they get into the ACC. They open with Elon.
Oh yeah, that powerhouse.
I'm trying to look at their logo. And I couldn't even tell you what that thing's supposed to be. Then they go to Troy, and they host Kansas and Tulane before they get into the ACC schedule. So Duke might just be 4-0 before they play at Miami to open the ACC part of their schedule. And if they can get through that Miami game, Georgia Tech, Virginia, Pitt, Syracuse, Virginia Tech.
Yeah.
Maybe Duke, North Carolina is a bigger game in football than it is in basketball this year.
That would be something, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But I'm rooting for him. I'd love to see him pull it off again. It was a lot of fun last year, and I'd like to see him doing it again, but I wouldn't bet on it.
Yeah. And Notre Dame, I'm going to include Notre Dame in the ACC part of our discussion here because I believe this is the first year of their agreement with the ACC where they have to play a certain number of ACC opponents. And so for all intents and purposes, they're an ACC team. The rest of their sports are moving over to the ACC. And they do play at Syracuse. They host North Carolina. They go to Tallahassee to play Florida State. And they also host Louisville later on the season. So Notre Dame, in their first year in the ACC, kinda start off ranked number 17 with actually a pretty good schedule in terms of Notre Dame schedules. I mentioned North Carolina, who's 23. Florida State's number 1. They host Stanford, who's 11. They go to Arizona State, number 19. And then, of course, they finish the season off at USC, starting off the season ranked number 15.
Is this the last year of the Notre Dame-Michigan rivalry?
This is the last year of the Notre Dame-Michigan game.
Right.
Yep. The last game in South Bend in week 2.
That's just a shame. I understand. No, I don't really understand why they're doing the ACC, because basically what you've got here is you've got an ACC conference schedule, sort of, and a few of their traditional opponents. But Michigan's going to be gone, and that's a shame. I don't know how it's going to affect their annual game against Purdue. It's just going to be interesting to play out, but we'll see. I don't like it. I don't like the Michigan game. I think that's one of the great traditions in college football is Notre Dame, Michigan, and this is it after this year.
Mm-hmm. As we close out our little ACC discussion here, some interesting uniform news in the ACC. Of course, they changed their logo this year, and as they brought in some Big East teams a year ago, it looks like they're changing to the Big East font for the ACC logo. Clemson's going to wear a patch. Duke, that classic uniform, the classic Indianapolis Colts uniform, they're changing their uniforms this year. They're adding a blue helmet, and they're moving the stripes from the shoulders to the arms, basically, from on top of the shoulders to the side. And I don't like that look for Duke.
Not at all. Not at all.
It doesn't look nice.
No, and you look at the I guess it would be the home uniform with the blue jersey, the white pants. The number font, especially on that particular jersey, it looks like something it looks like it came from the kids section at JCPenney or something. It just does not look like a top-flight college football jersey, and I don't like it a bit. I'm okay with the blue helmet, but the rest of it is a big downgrade from what they were wearing before.
Yeah, Duke, they kind of look like you said, not a Division I team.
No, and like a high school team.
I mean, for years they looked great. And even though they were bad on the field, they always looked nice.
Yeah, but not now.
Unfortunately, they followed up that big year with some bad uniform choices. And, of course, the unnecessary use of black because Nike.
Hey, we could do 5 shows on bad uniform choices, and we wouldn't run out of material.
No. Georgia Tech, of course, they're always changing. Louisville, their new uniform and what they've done to the regular helmet with the glossy, shiny cardinal – I'm not digging.
No, and they've got the chrome face mask now. It's not chrome in the traditional silver chrome, but it's a chromed version of the red face mask. And
it's like a candy.
Yeah, I'm not liking it either. And they're also doing the blackout uniforms, which is just so tired at this point.
Yeah.
Really, it's just something that was neat for 3 weeks back when it first started 15 years ago, and now it is just so played out. I don't know why people even bother.
University of Miami, we talked about these on basically a sports show, and they're not good.
No.
The helmets are pretty bad. I mean, they're putting a new sticker on the back of the helmet, too, which is kind of out of place.
It's out of place, but on its own, I like the sticker a lot with the Florida map and the U on it. It's really cool, but it has no business. It just makes the helmet, which is a bad helmet to begin with, just adds another bad element to it.
NC State's new alternate helmet is garbage.
Mm-hmm.
They took that 2/3 template the Navy used on those alternate uniforms, and they have this weird like carbon fiber texture on the top 2/3. The bottom is red with a pair of wolf eyes staring out the back of the helmet.
Yeah, and these aren't your typical what you would think of as when say I think it was the Akron Zips did it with the kangaroo eyes or whoever it was.
Right.
These are real, honest to goodness, a wolf face that is kind of sublimated into the finish of the helmet, and it just looks terrible.
Yeah. I don't get it. I mean, if you're trying to intimidate your opponents with the stare of a wolf, wouldn't you want it on the front side of the helmet?
You would think.
Yeah.
You would think.
But
maybe the idea is that as you're chasing the wolf pack down the field, the wolf eyes, I don't know. It's just a piece of garbage.
Yep. But we talked about this on the sports show as well. The team that's the class of the division on the field is going to be the class of the division in the uniform department too. Florida State, some great updates to their always classic uniform.
Yes, they did.
I love the new spear on the helmet. I love the design on the collar. But they're still going to look like Florida State. Gold helmet, spear, garnet jersey, gold pants.
I don't remember if I know that I really liked the garnet helmet addition to their uniforms.
Yes, yeah.
And I rarely am I one, especially when it's a traditional uniform like Florida State had, am I one to say, yeah, go ahead and change it. But I thought they did an outstanding job of updating it.
Yep. Florida State, as I mentioned, class of the division in every single possible way. We'll go back to the rankings to move down to number 2 and move on to our next division as the University of Alabama checks in at number 2. They're the highest ranked team in the SEC, an SEC that boasts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of their 13 members are ranked in the top 25 poll to open the season.
Wow.
The SEC is still the class of college football, from top to bottom.
Absolutely.
I mean, you have some of the dregs at the bottom. You know, Mississippi State's not great. Kentucky has been bad for a while. Florida, like we mentioned, the great program that Florida is in a down part of its era. But,
rebuilding, I think, would be the kindest way to put it.
Yeah. There was a couple people that think maybe the SEC could boast 11 teams that eventually become bowl eligible. And, I mean, looking at their teams and the schedule they play, they might beat up on each other a lot, especially in the West Division. But, there's no bad thing to really say about the SEC on the whole.
No, it's, again, still top to bottom. And again, I understand. I brought this up earlier. I think that every year going into college football, as long as Nick Saban is the coach there, you have to look at the Alabama Crimson Tide as the team to beat. Regardless of who's ranked number 1, whatever, I still just got to think they're the best team to me.
And Alabama, we'll start with them. Ranked number 2. If you remember all the way back to last season, they were poised. They were on their way to a national title game matchup between them and Florida State. It was going to be the power game of Alabama against the high-flying Jameis Winston. Was Nick Saban going to be able to, with a month off, he was going to devise a plan to shut down Florida State? And then the unthinkable happened. That their regular season ended on that incredible field goal return by Auburn. And then they go into the Sugar Bowl to play Oklahoma and get their doors blown off. They could not have cared any less about that Sugar Bowl, including Nick Saban mentioning in the offseason, something that got under Bob Stoops' skin, that it was an exhibition game. It didn't matter.
Well, when you're Alabama and you're playing for the national championship every year and you come into every season in recent history ranked in the top 5, a Sugar Bowl game against Oklahoma that means absolutely nothing, no, you're not going to care about that because that's not what you play for at Alabama. You play for all the marbles or you're wasting your time. I think the fan base feels that way. The coaching staff feels that way. The players feel that way. So, yeah, Oklahoma can put that feather in their hat, but let's not kid ourselves. If that game meant anything, it would have never been close on going the other way.
And Alabama is experiencing a similar problem to a lot of the teams in the SEC. they have two quarterbacks that they can't decide on who exactly is going to start. I believe Coker is going to be the starting quarterback for Alabama going into the season. You may not know his name, but he's a new transfer to Alabama from Florida State because he was competing with Jameis Winston for the starting job there. Got beat out by Jameis Winston, saw Jameis Winston rise to stardom and become a Heisman Trophy winner, national champion. So he decided, I'm never going to play. So he transferred to Alabama. It looks like he's going to be the starting quarterback going into the season. But Alabama's game is going to be dependent on their running backs, like a lot of the SEC. You know, their star, T.J. Yeldon, who played immensely well last year for the Crimson Tide.
And their defense, of course, which is not exactly the fastest, most mobile defense you're ever going to see, but they're big. They get in your way, and that's what they do. And they're just going to try to outpower you. And I just got to tell you, good luck. I mean, you might think that because they're not as mobile and fast and blah, 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 good luck with that because they still will get the job done.
They force a lot of turnovers, too.
Yeah.
And that's always been Nick Saban's calling card. Alabama, I mean, of the teams in the West, Alabama probably has the easiest of these schedules when it comes to the top teams. Two big road games at Ole Miss, number 18, and at LSU, number 13. But they get Texas A&M at home, number 21, Texas A&M, and they get Auburn at home. Auburn currently number 6 in the AP Top 25.
Think the Tide will be looking for a little payback in that one?
Yeah, I don't think Nick Saban I mean, you looked at the sideline of that game. You could just see the look on Saban's face as they go running down the sideline, and he was incensed.
Yeah.
You knew that not incensed in the way a normal person would be incensed, but you could just see it in his eyes. He was pissed.
Well, I think we talked about this last year when it happened. It's one of the few times where Nick Saban kind of got out-coached.
Yeah.
He made – I don't know if he even got out-coached so much as he just made some dumb mistakes. I don't know that what's his name, Gene Chizik, actually outcoached him. I just think that Saban just did some things that, given the chance to think it over again, would have never done, like the field goal attempt. I just don't know if he would have tried that under normal circumstances. But
field goal attempt, they went for fourth down a couple weird times in that fourth quarter to try and keep onto the ball. But that's football; things happen. But like I mentioned, not as tough schedule. To prep themselves for their season-ending clash in the Iron Bowl, number 6 Auburn, big tough team. Alabama's going to work themselves up with Western Carolina,
right?
So they open up with West Virginia in the Georgia Dome. Not this. I don't believe it's this weekend.
Yeah, it's Saturday, the 30th, right?
They're playing a lot of games in the Georgia Dome. They're playing Boise and Ole Miss on Thursday, too.
Oh, a good weekend to be in Atlanta if you're a football fan.
And then Florida Atlantic the next week, Southern Miss the next week, and then they get Florida to kick off their SEC.
Who did they had a cupcake last year, too, right before they played Auburn. I don't remember.
How they always do. I
don't remember who it was, but we made fun of it then. And
yeah. I mean, there's some of these are just terrible. Like, what is the Western Carolina mascot? I'm going to click on this. Ooh, the Western Carolina Catamounts.
Cool name.
Yeah.
And they'll show up and get their paycheck and, go back home rich and be done.
Sure. And that Western Carolina game, that's Western Carolina's final game of the year, is they go to Alabama.
And pick up a paycheck, basically. Yeah, you're basically the practice squad for the Crimson Tide as they get ready to play the Auburn Tigers. Simple as that.
Yeah, well.
But
enjoy that.
Western Carolina. Well, we all know what they're there for.
But, of course, as I mentioned, the team that beat Alabama and the number 2 or second highest ranked team in the SEC West, the number 6 Auburn Tigers, of course, lose the national championship game to Florida State. A miracle to even get to the national championship game. You remember the Hail Mary against Georgia?
Right.
The as they're calling it, the prayer at Jordan Hare. And then they get the field goal return against Alabama the next week. And then they go into the SEC title game and just go in this back-and-forth shootout with Mizzou, of all teams. And they end up winning the SEC and going on to that national championship game. They're having some issues at quarterback, too. They're deciding between Nick Marshall, who was the starter last year, and Jeremy Johnson. Looks like Jeremy Johnson being named the starter. Some personal issues with Nick Marshall over the offseason, probably leading to his demotion. That's a thing. Quarterbacks need to play the part.
Yep, we talked about that on basically a sports show earlier this week. Yep,
with Johnny Manziel, of course, SEC star. And but they do lose Trey Mason, the running back. But they, as almost all these SEC teams have, they just have a stable of guys to just plug in there. Auburn, though, a lot of people are picking Auburn to maybe eventually overtake Alabama again. But they have a tough schedule. They have a road game at number 20 Kansas State. Not a big deal, Kansas State. They host number 13 LSU, but then they go through a stretch of 4 consecutive weeks where they host number 9 South Carolina. They go to number 18 Ole Miss. They host number 21 Texas A&M, and then they go to Georgia. And of course, they finish off the year at Alabama.
Let's not. Since we kind of gave Alabama a hard time for this, let's not leave Auburn out of the equation either. Before they play Alabama to end the season in the Iron Bowl,
yes,
they've got a scheduled game against Samford.
Right.
Not Stanford with a T, Samford with a Sam.
Right. So if you want to take that game out of it, they essentially have 5 straight games against ranked opponents or preseason ranked opponents.
And I want to correct myself from something earlier. I said Gene Chizik. He's a coach ago. I meant Gus Malzahn.
Yes.
So anyway, but I tell you, I like Auburn a lot. They had a really nice comeback season last year. I'm not certain they're not a little bit overranked going into this season. I think that again, I'm not taking anything away from them, but they were 2 plays away from not even being in the conversation last year. So I think they're cashing in some of their chips from last year to get ranked this high. I'm not sure that they're number 6, but they're still going to be a good football team.
Next up, LSU, who seems to be perennially ranked number 13.
Right.
I think that's where they're ranked in the preseason every year. Same issue. They can't decide on a quarterback right now, but they have a good running game. They have a strong defense. Les Miles is probably going to eat some grass this year, as he always does.
God, that's so gross. But yeah.
Yeah. But just like all these SEC West teams, tough schedule. They open the season in Houston against number 14 Wisconsin. Probably another SEC win over a Big Ten team. Sorry, Greg.
I agree with that. LSU, I think is. I think they're a better team. You never know quite what to make of them, and I think that's why they're always ranked 13th, because they can either be really good or they're just going to be pretty good. They're never going to be terrible, but we'll just have to wait and see. But yeah, Wisconsin, I don't believe will put up much of a fight against LSU. I don't think that the talent levels are equal enough for Wisconsin to give them much of a game.
Yep. Their SEC schedule, they're at Auburn, at A&M, and they host Ole Miss and Alabama. Maybe LSU could get Alabama to trip up in Death Valley, but that game is tough all the time, no matter where it is. Number 18, Ole Miss. They open the season at Boise State, or against Boise State in the Georgia Dome. They play number 2 Alabama at home. They're at A&M, at LSU, home against Auburn, and Ole Miss. You think we're talking about all these teams that have these big clashes at the end of the year. Ole Miss ends the season against Mississippi State and Arkansas. Before that, they play Presbyterian. Now, Greg, do you know what the mascot is for Presbyterian College?
You could offer me $1 million, I wouldn't be able to name it. I have not the faintest clue.
Well, in the big South powerhouse that is Presbyterian, their mascot, they are the Presbyterian Blue Hose.
Okay, now is that a reference to socks as in hose, or as in the thing
H-O-S-E?
The thing that you spray your garden with, hose.
It's spelled like a hose.
Well, that's interesting. I have no idea. I didn't even know these guys were.
Maybe, I guess hose are spelled the same way. Maybe it is supposed to be like blue socks.
It would be better if it were actually a garden hose. That would be great. It'd be It'd be like one of my favorite mascots of all time, but it's not. Honest to God, Zach, I had no idea these guys even existed. At least with Samford and some of the other cupcakes that roll along, you've at least heard of them. I've never heard of these guys until today.
They've played the SEC warm-up games before. But Presbyterian Blue Hose.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, just on Ole Miss really quick, Ole Miss reminds me of, say, a team like the Kansas City Royals or what the Arizona Cardinals were for years. They're a team that you always think this is going to be the year they break through and they're really good, and they always seem to kind of disappoint. So I don't know what they're going to be. 18 might be ranked too high. It might be just right. But I always look at Ole Miss and I see a 7-5 team.
Yep.
No matter what they do.
Next up, number 21, Texas A&M. They begin their first year life after Johnny Manziel. They also lose Mike Evans, who was Manziel's favorite receiver. They lose Ben Molina, who was the starting running back there for A&M. The defense still not very improved. For a team that scored the 5th most points in college football last year, they also led up the 96th most points in college football. They're at number 9 South Carolina, host Ole Miss, at Alabama, and they finish off the year with 3 straight games at Auburn, at home against number 24 Mizzou, and finish off the season at home versus number 13 LSU.
I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that by week 6, A&M's not even in the rankings anymore.
Week 6, I don't know. I mean, they open with South Carolina, hard game, number 9. Okay, then they have Lamar, Rice.
Yeah, you're right.
SMU,
Okay. All right. Let me change that to week 8. They'll be out of the rankings. I didn't see that. I didn't. I mean, had I known they were playing the powerhouse Lamar, I would have changed my whole approach. But
yeah, I think even if they lose that first game to South Carolina, which they should, they'll rack up those wins up until maybe Ole Miss. I see them losing the Ole Miss game. They had a tough time against Ole Miss last year. I think Ole Miss beat them down in Mississippi, if I remember correctly. And then, of course, going to Alabama, they don't have Johnny Manziel to pull that game out of his ass anymore.
No. Who is taking over at quarterback for him anyway?
I do not know.
Let me see if I can figure it out real quick here. It doesn't say. So in my little preview here.
I would assume. Let's see, who was the backup last year? Jockle?
Jockle, yeah. Would that be our guy this year?
I would have to assume if he's still on the team.
Matt Jockle, yeah, he's a senior. I'm going to take a wild guess and say he's it. You never know.
But sometimes, I mean, no matter whatever guy you're going to throw out there, he's not Johnny Manziel.
No, and Texas A&M's not a team where sometimes if you've got a lot of talent, sometimes a quarterback that's a little more traditional can actually help you in certain ways because it kind of evens out your game a little bit. But that's not Texas A&M's game. So I don't know. I just, like I said, I think by week 8 we're not even talking about them in the big picture anymore.
And a little link there on the page that shows ESPN Fan Shop. They're selling a Texas A&M Aggies number 2 white replica jersey. I don't know who that is.
I have no idea.
Well, that's Johnny Manziel's old number.
Oh, yeah, I know. I'm kidding.
The other 2 teams in the West are Arkansas and Mississippi State. Thanks for playing.
Right. Here are your parting gifts.
Yeah. Over in the SEC East, a little bit easier. Only 3 ranked teams. Number 9 South Carolina, easily the class again. They lose Jadeveon Clowney on defense, and their defense was great last year with Clowney. Schedule is pretty tough though. They host number 21 A&M. They host Georgia. They host Missouri. All those teams up and down when it comes to the rankings. And they go to Auburn and, of course, finish off the season at Clemson. But we've already mentioned Clemson and how that could be a game that Clemson very well loses because they're Clemson.
Right.
In South Carolina, they're always the team. They're always ranked about number 9, or at least over the last few years or so. Everyone's always waiting for them to finally make it to the SEC championship game, finally win the SEC, be that powerhouse that Steve Spurrier has always touted them to be. But they always seem to trip up somewhere. And, they have another tough schedule at the beginning this year where they host A&M. They play East Carolina, who's not a pushover.
No, not at all.
And they host number 12 Georgia the week after that. So it could be a rough start for South Carolina, and then, of course, they play Missouri in week 5. So they could go downhill quickly, or they could finally become who we all want them to be and win the division and make the SEC title game.
I think they've got to show up for the Auburn game undefeated to have a shot at it, and I just don't know that they will. Georgia is going to be a tough team. South Carolina reminds me of a better version of like an Ole Miss, where you think this is going to be the year, but they're always going to get 2 losses, most likely in the conference, and they're always going to be that they're like Kansas State in the Big 12. They're really good until they have to play the big guys, and then they're not so good anymore. Mm-hmm. That's my feeling on South Carolina.
Next up is number 12 Georgia. They had a lot of issues last year, a lot of injuries, and lost some bad games. And I believe, did they lose the first 2 games of the season last year against Clemson and South Carolina?
I think so.
Because they start off this season with the exact same schedule. They host number 16 Clemson. They're at number 9 South Carolina. And later in the year, they go to Missouri and host Auburn. Easier schedule than South Carolina, obviously. But Aaron Murray's not back. Aaron Murray's gone. And they're going to have to rely a lot on the running backs, like I mentioned with a lot of these SEC teams. But their 2 running backs are 2 of the best in the SEC.
Yes.
And they're going to have to rely on them to get them through that early stretch of some of these tough games if Georgia wants to take over South Carolina. And I mean that game against South Carolina is probably going to determine who wins this side of the division, unless Missouri comes back around the outside like they did last year to kind of surprisingly get to the SEC championship game.
Yeah, that was pretty amazing run by Missouri last year. But just real quick on Georgia's running backs, Todd Gurley and every top running back list I've seen is at least the top 5. So even though Murray's gone, they will be able to pick up the running game. And you never know with. I want to say that last year Georgia actually got off to the good start, and we thought this might finally be the year. And then I thought they had some losses later on. I don't remember, but in either case,
they did lose to Missouri late. Yeah,
I think you're right that South Carolina game is probably going to determine the winner of that side of the conference.
Yeah, Missouri, number 24. They battled through some quarterback injuries, and it was amazing that their backup came in. Mike Mock led them to the SEC championship game. They didn't win it, but it was amazing that they were there in the first place. Missouri in the SEC championship game.
And wasn't that their first year in the conference too?
Yes.
Yeah. No one thought they would be able to pull that off. No one.
Right. And they only have 3 ranked teams on the schedule: South Carolina, Georgia, and Texas A&M. 2 of those on the road. They're home against Georgia. But they're going to have to pull a lot out to do what they did last year. And I can't see them doing it. I mean, they're in the, like I mentioned, they're in the easy side of the SEC, so they're going to win games against Kentucky and Tennessee and Florida. Vanderbilt might pose a little bit of an issue, but Vanderbilt also lost their head coach to Penn State. So Missouri's probably going to be that third team. I mean, maybe if Georgia and South Carolina get beat up by their tougher schedule and they're able to beat whoever wins that game, the Georgia-South Carolina game, maybe they can pull around and do it again, but I don't think so.
I think they're another one like I talked about with Auburn earlier. I think that Missouri's kind of riding a little bit on last year's wave. I don't know that they're going to be quite as good as they were last year, and they were shockingly good last year. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. As always, the SEC, and love it, hate it, whatever you want to say about it, is always the most fascinating conference in football, if you ask me. You just can't beat it for top to bottom. It's just a lot of fun.
And, of course, the rest of the East is Vanderbilt, who's been better of recent, but they lose their head coach, James Franklin, to Penn State, like I mentioned.
Real quick, what do you think of that move? Would you have done that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Vanderbilt has a certain ceiling.
Right.
That you can eventually reach, especially in the SEC. Vanderbilt could be the best that they've ever been, like they were, those couple of years ago with Jay Cutler on the team.
Right.
But they're never going to beat out South Carolina or Georgia or Alabama. And adding Missouri and Texas A&M is going to make that even tougher for them. So it's a nice school. It's a very well-respected academic school. They're very good at baseball, decent basketball team from time to time, but the football team has a certain ceiling that I don't think you could ever break through unless the whole SEC just imploded on itself. Whereas at Penn State, there's a lot more upward mobility in the Big Ten.
I just don't know. I guess to me, I understand why James Franklin would leave Vanderbilt. You're right. There's a ceiling for a team like that. And whatever they've done over the past years, that's as good as they're ever going to be in football. I just wonder if the Penn State job, I mean, you're bringing there's a lot of baggage waiting for you when you get there.
Well, thankfully, the thing with the Penn State job, and this is something we could talk to when we get to him more, but it's now you're the guy after the guy.
Yeah.
You never want to be the guy, the first replacement.
Oh, no, you always want to be the replacement's replacement. No question about it.
And even though Bill O'Brien had a great year for Penn State and moved on to the Houston Texans, there's still that buffer zone now between you and the Joe Paterno sagas of old. And I believe he's a Pennsylvania guy. I think he's from Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So it's a move home. It's a lot of that sort of stuff. But.
Well, not to mention, too, that if he goes and resurrects that program and gets some of the stain off of it, he's going to be a god for the rest of his life in that area. So, but anyway.
Yeah, Florida, still terrible. Will Muschamp is going to be fired at the end of the year. I don't see how he makes it through another.
I don't know how he made it through last year.
Yeah,
really.
That's true. Tennessee,
What happened to the Vols? They used to be so solid and just.
Yeah, I mean they pulled out some great competitive wins last year, but and then Kentucky. Yeah. The other thing I forgot to mention.
They're waiting for They're waiting for basketball season in Lexington. Go ahead.
Yeah. We forgot to mention when we were talking about Alabama. How could we forget? Lane Kiffin makes his return to the SEC.
Oh, yes. He sure does, yeah.
Alabama. How long do you think Nick Saban keeps him on the team, like realistically?
Well, realistically, I'm surprised he hired him.
Right.
But I think a lot of it's going to depend on if Alabama's offense performs above expectations. Yeah, he'll probably stick around. But
does he make it to a second year? I can't. I don't know why people are still giving him chances.
Well, not only that, but I think one of two things happens: either Saban gets tired of him and cuts him loose, or another stupid school comes along and says we're going to give him another shot at a head coaching job. And if I'm thinking like Lane Kiffin, I'm thinking that's my strategy here. Go be the offensive coordinator at Alabama and try to use that to catapult to another head coaching job. And woe onto the school that hires him because the guy's not good.
I mean, I was listening to something, and they went down his coaching career. I mean, as we all have done. What has he done to deserve any of the chances he's gotten?
I have no idea.
He was the offensive coordinator in name only at USC. He was not calling the plays. Steve Sarkisian was calling the plays when Pete Carroll was winning titles at SC. Then he goes to the Raiders because he was friends with Al Davis or something.
Yeah,
like
but
that.
He wasn't even. I don't remember, and I might be off on this, but was he even their first choice? Wasn't he kind of like a Mike Pettin hire for the Browns, where he was just the guy that was left after nobody else wanted it?
Yeah, and then of course he gets fired there, goes to Tennessee for the 1 year,
ruins that team
he was there for a year, and then leaves to go to SC, where then he still ruins the team. I mean, they were in the sanction periods, and they had some okay seasons. But the last game of his career when he was playing at Arizona State and just got blown the doors off, it gets left at LAX when they get home.
Yeah, but that's what though, when you're a guy like Lane Kiffin, and I don't think that I'm exposing anything here by saying this, that he's not a well-liked guy and he's kind of a jackass.
No. Yeah.
I hate to say it because it's not really a very classy thing to do, but I love the fact that they said, you know what, you're off the bus, I'll see you later, and left him sitting there. I thought it was great.
Anybody that deserved it was probably Lane Kiffin.
Exactly. But it's really curious to see how this is going to work out with Alabama, because it's not like Nick Saban is a guy that will just step aside and go, okay, Lane, you do your thing.
Yeah.
I don't see it working out well at all.
Yeah. Uniform-wise, not too much going on in the SEC. No one ever really changes too much in the SEC.
Thank God.
Alabama's changed Nike templates, but big deal. They still look like Alabama. Arkansas has a new interesting look with kind of razorback, the tusks kind of shape on the shoulders. Kentucky rolled out some new uniforms, but who noticed? I mean,
right.
They have a gray uniform now, so welcome to the club,
Kentucky.
Right. Probably the biggest change is LSU. They're changing the number font a little bit back to what it used to be before they got those tall, skinny numbers, which were kind of awful.
Right.
But they also finally updated that horrible-looking tiger on the side of their helmets.
Oh, jeez. So, it's about time.
Yeah, I mean, the old one was... It looked like it was a petrified dead cat.
Well, the best thing you could say about it is it had been around a while. That was the best thing you could say about it.
Right. But that's about it when it comes to the SEC. Mississippi State's new uniforms, but again, who noticed?
Great color scheme at Mississippi State. Love their color scheme. Love it.
But every year when they play Mississippi, they change the name on the jerseys. Instead of Mississippi State, it says Hail State, and they make it like gold because of the Egg Bowl.
Right.
It's supposed to be gold. I don't know, but that's what's going on out in the South.
Well, real quick, who do you like? I'm taking Alabama on, and I'm gonna. You know what? I'm gonna go off maybe just a little bit off the board. I'm gonna say Georgia on the other side.
I'd say Alabama as well. Auburn's going to be right there, but Alabama's not going to lose to Auburn at the end of the year again. Nick Saban will make sure of that. And I want to believe in South Carolina, but I can't,
right?
Because they haven't. So I'm going to go with Georgia. I love the running backs, but either way, I think Alabama wins the SEC.
Yeah,
makes the playoff. Do you think the SEC will have 2 teams in the playoff, though? Looking at the teams that are in there right now.
It's possible, but I really think, honestly, and this is where the human element of this playoff is going to come into play, I don't think that right out of the gate they want to let that happen. So unless there's just a situation where you just can't deny it, I don't know that they're going to get 2 teams out of the 4.
I think the interesting thing is because I mentioned how tough at least the SEC West is, there's a lot of people that are wondering, first off, whoever wins the SEC, will they be undefeated? Secondly, could you see a 2-loss SEC team making the playoff?
No. They shouldn't. But here's the thing, too, though, and this is the nice thing about the playoff, is that strength of schedule is going to come into play.
Yeah.
Which, God willing, as this thing progresses, we'll see less and less Samfords and Presbyterians on the schedule and more real games, which is only a benefit for us as college football fans.
Right. And, I mean, the strength of schedule thing is just off the charts for the West. I mean, every time I went to a new team, I kept reading off all the rankings. It's insane. But hopefully we don't ever get to a point where they're like, well, they might have lost 3 games, but look at all those teams they played. Let's put them in the playoff. I hope we never get to that point with this playoff, but
I think for them to get in, especially with a 2-loss team, you would have to have it where, like, say, the Pac-12 champion had a couple losses, the ACC, like Florida State. It would just have to be a thing where you just really didn't have a choice but to pick the other SEC team. Know the SEC champion is going to be in that playoff every single year.
Of course.
Just to reserve a spot for them, so really you're playing for 3 spots.
Right.
Because the SEC team's always going to be there.
Well, you mentioned the Pac-12 and how maybe the Pac-12 champion has a couple losses. I think that might be the case because of the way the Pac-12 is scheduled. They're one of only 2 conferences that plays the 9 conference games, and you have the conference championship game. And the way that the best teams in the Pac-12 line up, whoever plays in the Pac-12 championship game might just be a rematch. And let's go over to the Pac-12, over to my area of the country. The number 3 leading the Northern Division is the Oregon Ducks. Marcus Mariota returns at quarterback. He's a Heisman favorite, as all top returning quarterbacks are. It's the second year for the coaching staff without Chip Kelly, and Oregon has an interesting bit of scheduling. All their big ranked games right now are at home. They host Stanford. In week 2, they host number 8 Michigan State.
Right,
a big game early in the season. And later on in the year, they host number 25 Washington. But Washington, first year under Chris Peterson, don't know what you're really going to get out of the Huskies right yet. But the big game for them is at UCLA. UCLA opens the season at number 7, which is ridiculous. But
I got to agree.
But Oregon kind of gets the benefit of the doubt with the home games and the one tough road game there. But we know what we're going to get from Oregon. They're going to wear something different every week. They're going to be the fastest team on the field. And Marcus Mariota, as many people believe, he's the favorite to be the first quarterback picked in next year's NFL draft. What do you think of the Oregon Ducks?
Well, I another team that you kind of always see them ranked here, and if they can sustain it, then they'll stay there. But I always think they're really good. But they're kind of like the Big Ten. I mean, I don't know that they're quite up to the level of like an SEC team or something. So, yeah, they might run all the way through. They might win the Pac-12. I don't see them as a serious national championship contender. Who did they? I know they had a couple of losses that were, well, I think Stanford beat them last year, right?
Yeah, Stanford beat them because they're, the big physical team that Stanford is,
right,
always seem to have a way to shut down that Oregon.
And they're facing in their second week of the season, they've got another big physical team in Michigan State. But now Michigan, I think that Michigan State, they've got a really great defense. I don't know if they can score enough to beat Oregon in Oregon, so that would be a problem. But again, it's a tough matchup for them. But I don't know. I'm never entirely sold on the Ducks until they finally punch that ticket and go all the way. I'm always going to be a little bit skeptical.
Yeah, I agreed. Because the team that's always standing in their way is number 11 Stanford. They return Kevin Hogan as the quarterback. Just like every single year, they have just a big, beefy offensive line and these big, strong running backs. Now they did lose their defensive coordinator, and he was the guy that really kind of figured out how to shut down Oregon. They also lose their linebacker, Shane Scove, who you might remember was the guy with the face paint and the mohawk.
Right.
Always on the field. But Stanford, pretty difficult schedule. Oregon got off pretty easy when it comes to the ranked teams in the Pac-12. Stanford hosts number 15 USC, but they're at Washington, at Notre Dame, at ASU, at Oregon, and at UCLA.
That's brutal.
Yeah, and the UCLA game is the final game of the year down in the Rose Bowl.
That is a brutal schedule. I mean, that's going to be very tough for them to run the table with that schedule. I don't know how they're going to do it. It's going to be tough.
I think Stanford's probably the best team in the Pac-12 right now. But, I mean, from top to bottom, everything considered. But that schedule is rough.
I mean, you're just asking an awful lot of a team to go to UCLA, to Oregon, to Notre Dame, and even at USC, and to Washington, and win all 5 of those games. Mm-hmm. That's just a lot to ask. And no matter how good they are, it's just a really tall order to fill for a team. And Oregon State's not going to be bad either. They can put points up, and it's going to. They've got a tough road here.
Yeah, and the game that they're playing at Arizona State, there's no time determined for that game yet. So it could be at night, it could be fine, it could be in the middle of the day, and it could be 90 degrees in the desert. So it's that's going to be especially for a big physical team like Stanford, they could get tired down pretty easily in that sort of heat, and all these road games, all that travel, it eventually just wears on you.
Yeah,
but luckily for them, they get Army at home. They get UC Davis, Washington State at home. Oregon State, even though they're tough, is at home. Utah's at home. So, and the game against Cal is going to be a slaughter. So that normally big rivalry game, not a big deal.
Not so much these days.
The team that's currently third there in the Pac-12 North, number 25, Washington. They lose Steve Sarkisian to USC, but they finally someone wrestled Chris Peterson away from Boise State. They have a strong front seven on defense, and not a terrible schedule. They host Stanford, they're at Oregon, and then they host ASU and UCLA. I think Washington could pose some problems when it comes to this Pac-12 race. I don't see them winning in Oregon, but we mentioned the Stanford schedule. They host Stanford. They host ASU, who's not good when it's raining. And UCLA, the game against UCLA is later on in the year, and that's when UCLA is, to some people's predictions, going to be trying to play for a national title.
I don't see that either.
I don't. Trust me. I have plenty to say when we get to the Bruins. But with Chris Peterson coming in, you don't know what you're going to get. Because you look at Boise State and the history of Boise State, they've always had some up years here and there. But is Chris Peterson going to be another Dirk Cutter or a Dan Hawkins? Guys that were really great at Boise State but couldn't do anything elsewhere?
I don't know, and it's interesting to me that he's had offers since Boise State kind of came into national prominence.
Right. I mean, he's had offers for UCLA, for Texas,
right,
for USC, and to turn them down for Washington.
To pick Washington makes me wonder if maybe he likes a challenge, which obviously of the Pac-12, of the preeminent Pac-12 teams, Washington's probably the toughest one to work with. Is it that, or is he just doesn't want the spotlight? I don't know. I like the hire. I like the fact that they got him, but in his first year, who knows? They could be great. They could be, 6-6. Who knows? But they're going to be interesting, I think. Are they changing the offense? I mean, are they doing all that stuff? Because that can be a transition because you don't have the personnel that matches your scheme, all that. So we'll see. They should be fun.
They'll be fun. The only thing I could think of why Chris Peterson would go there is because Boise and Washington aren't too far from each other.
Right. Maybe
that's it. But Washington actually has they have an interesting schedule, at least early on. They opened at Hawaii, which you take or leave it, and take or leave Hawaii as a football program. They may be cutting that in a few years, supposedly.
Really?
Yeah. The travel budget is just insane for Hawaii.
Oh my God! Yeah.
Division I sports are just tough for them in general. They host Eastern Washington. They host Illinois. They host Georgia State. And then they go from some of those easy games to hosting Stanford in what's going to be the fourth of 4 home games to open up their schedule there. So who knows what you're going to get from Washington.
Well, when you're ranked plus you're ranked 25th in the preseason poll, I don't know that that's a real strong endorsement of how good you're going to be, so much as just like right. You're kind of like, well, could be Washington. We'll throw them at 25. So I don't know that they're going to be a real challenge, but they could be surprising because Chris Peterson, as he's shown at Boise State, is a really good coach. But by the same token, the competition level goes up quite a bit from the old Mountain West Conference, too. So that's something to think about.
Yeah. Elsewhere in the Pac-12 North, Oregon State comes back with Sean Mannion, who a lot of people love as an NFL prospect. But he's had his ups and downs with Oregon State. But like you mentioned earlier, Oregon State's a team that they sometimes throw a wrench into things because they find ways to win. And, they've got those beautiful uniforms now, so they have no reason to lose.
Well, and Mannion had a great year last year. I think he led Division I. I just can't get used to calling it FBS. Division I football in passing last year.
Yeah, you had some intimate experiences with him on your fantasy team.
He was great. Yeah. I fell right into him too. I don't know how I ended up with that guy, but I did. But he's going to be interesting. He's a senior this year, so he's going to be a year better. But I don't know how much talent they lost around him. They could make some noise, but I don't think they're a threat to really win anything. But they could make some noise. They could make an upset here or there and screw up the whole works. So we'll see.
Then you also have Washington State with Mike Leach. Whatever. And then Cal, who's fallen on some really hard times.
Oh, my goodness, have they.
But the only interesting thing to note about Cal, they go to Northwestern in week 1. And if somehow Cal can beat Northwestern in that first week, I think that might change the national perception of the two conferences, the Big Ten and the Pac-12. And maybe people say, well, if Cal can beat Northwestern, how good is the rest of the Big Ten? And if Cal can beat Northwestern, how good is the rest of the Pac-12? So, interesting thing in week 1. I'm not too concerned about it. I think Cal will still probably lose that game.
Depends on what Northwestern does, yeah.
Yeah. Moving on down to the South and the top-ranked team in the Southern Division. I don't know how they're this high. I don't know why people have these expectations for them. Number 7 is the UCLA Bruins. They bring back Brent Hundley.
That's why.
They bring back Brent Hundley. Lee Corso and Kirk Herbstreit have picked them to win the Heisman Trophy. Corso and Desmond Howard picked UCLA to be the national champions of this playoff.
No.
Now, Brent Hundley's good. I don't think he's Heisman good. And Miles Jack is a fantastic linebacker leading that defense.
Right.
And Jim Moore has done a lot of great things with that defense. But national champion? Number 7?
I just don't see it.
Where did this opinion of UCLA come from?
Well, it's a lot like what we saw with Auburn coming into this year. A lot of it is just cashing in from last season. UCLA, they were good, but they kind of faded towards the end, and I don't see it. Number 7, I'm sorry, I'm just not buying it. And really interesting, Sports Illustrated has them at number 5. I just don't see it. I don't have a thing against UCLA, but after Hundley and Jack, what do you got?
They have a decent running back, some wide receivers. I don't know. I watched plenty of UCLA last year, and I was never too impressed.
No.
I mean, did they lose that game in Utah? I know they were close to losing a game up in Utah. ASU beat them late to end up winning the Pac-12 South. But I have no words as to why there's so much hype around UCLA.
I don't. Watching them last year, and I don't recall hearing that they had a lot of great players coming in. I don't know where it's coming from either.
No, and they have a pretty tough schedule. They go now. Right now, Texas is not ranked, but they go to play Texas in Cowboy Stadium in week 2.
That's not going to be an easy game.
Right. It's marked as a neutral site game, but no.
Right, sure.
They're playing the Texas Longhorns in Cowboy Stadium. It's not a neutral site game. They're at Arizona State, but they host Oregon. They're at Washington, and they host USC and Stanford. So they get some of the tougher ones at home. The two ranked road games, ASU and Washington. I think UCLA better watch out for ASU. And I'll talk about them a little bit more in a minute. Obviously, I have intimate knowledge of the Sun Devils, but ASU can score a lot of points, and if they're going to be playing in Tempe, I think it's a night game. Let me check.
10 o'clock on Fox Sports 1. Yep.
Yeah, there you go. It's a night game, so the heat's not going to be a huge issue. Although it is late September, it could still be kind of warm. But I don't know. UCLA, they have the talent. Sure, they can win these games. And, of course, if they end up winning the Pac-12, they could go into the playoff. But here's the issue. Even if they beat Oregon when they play them, and Oregon say that's Oregon's only loss, and say UCLA stumbles to ASU or Stanford in the last game of the year, they would have to play Oregon again, and they could have to go up to Autzen Stadium. Or no, it wouldn't be an Autzen. That's right. This year, they've changed that. This year is the first year the Pac-12 game is at a neutral site. It'll be at Levi Stadium in Santa Clara.
Provided they have a field by then, yeah.
Right, provided that the turf is still laid down on that
right.
But the way the Pac-12 works out, because you have so many conference games, and then you have to play another conference team in the championship game, it's going to be tough for any of these teams to beat another team twice and end up winning the Pac-12. I mean, ASU did it last year. They played Stanford kind of tight during the regular season, and then they even host the Pac-12 championship game, but then Stanford comes in and rolls them over.
Well, here's my question about UCLA. Looking at that schedule, okay? Do you look at the Arizona State game? Do you look at Oregon? Do you look at even maybe Washington? But do you look at USC and Stanford and go, yes, UCLA will definitely beat those teams? No, I don't look at it. It's a toss-up at best.
No, even they host Oregon, but Oregon's not an easy team to beat either.
No, that's what I'm saying. I mean, it's not like you can look at, say, an Alabama schedule and go, yeah, okay, they're playing at, like, say, South Carolina, just as an example. You don't look at that and go, I wonder. You go, yeah, Alabama's going to win that game. I don't see that with UCLA. I don't look at the schedule and go, yeah, they can beat everybody on their schedule. I just don't see it.
But if UCLA does manage to win these games, and they do manage to be undefeated or one loss, then they'll have earned it. And
sure, yeah.
We'll see at the end of the year. But I just, from my own standpoint, maybe I'm a little biased against UCLA because I just don't like UCLA in general.
That's fine, but I agree with you. So I don't think it's just bias talking here.
Yeah, I just don't see all this hype for the Bruins, but. What do I know?
It's Hundley. I mean, you look at even right here looking at this.
I'm not even that impressed with Hundley, though. I don't see what people see in him. Yeah, he's tall and he has a long athletic stride, but he makes a lot of mistakes.
Exactly, but that's the thing. When he's playing well, he's really, really good, but he's not incredibly consistent. And right here, straight out of the Sports Illustrated preview, it all comes down to the quarterback and can he play consistently. If you've got that question mark, I'm sorry, but if that's your big question mark for the season, you're not going to win a national championship. Because if you're worried about consistent quarterback play, you've got a problem right out of the gate. No one looked at Johnny Manziel here and said, well, if he can be consistent, no one. That's the difference. And I like UCLA, but I don't see them as number 7. I'd put them a lot lower than that.
Yep. Finally rising back into the conversation. They're out from underneath their sanctions. Number 15 is the USC Trojans. Steve Sarkisian comes in to replace Lane Kiffin, or excuse me, not replace Lane Kiffin. He's replacing Ed Orgeron, who was the interim, led a kind of spirited charge for the Trojans at the end of the year. Did not hold on to the job, though. Cody Kessler is the starting quarterback there for the Trojans, and they have their schedule's okay. They go to Stanford. They go to UCLA, which not a road game, and they host ASU and host Notre Dame in the last game of the year. So a pretty easy schedule there for the Trojans that they could easily get through, and maybe they're the ones that are representing the Pac-12 South in the Pac-12 title game.
Yeah, they could be tough. I mean, Cody Kessler, from what I understand, is a pretty good player. Mm-hmm. You've got Steve Sarkisian with the new offense coming in. They're going to put up a lot of points. They're going to be an interesting team to watch this year, the Trojans are.
Yeah, they have a lot of talent at wide receiver, too. So
right. I mean, this is a team that right now they are ranked, what was it?
15.
15. You could see them move up pretty quickly, I think. Just because, first off, they're USC, and they start winning, and then the voters start going, hey, they're USC, and before you know it, they're working their way up. But I'll tell you what, I like their chances a lot better than I like UCLA's.
But you know what? You know what's going to be great about that, though? The fact that the USC-UCLA game will mean something.
Yeah.
For the first time in a while.
Right.
When they play in the second to last game of the year.
And God willing, you or UCLA will wear a normal football uniform, so that great color-on-color matchup.
Well, I think that they'll wear the normal jerseys. We'll talk about those awful L.A. Steel jerseys that they brought out.
Because when I think of L.A., the first thing I think of is Steel, let me tell you.
Hey, we're the West Coast Pittsburgh.
Okay.
Third place is number 19, your Arizona State Sun Devils, led by Tyler Kelly, the quarterback. They lost a lot on defense, but they've gotten even better on offense, if that's even possible. And they're going to win a lot of games 50-40, 40-30. It's going to be a fun season if you're going to watch any ASU football. But they go through a stretch. And this is where the tough part.
It's brutal
for Arizona State goes. They host UCLA, then they go at USC, home against Stanford, and at Washington. 4 games in a row.
And then they get Utah, and then they're right back at it against number 17 Notre Dame.
Yeah, they get a week off with Utah. Notre Dame comes down to the desert, and then they go to Oregon State, which late in the year isn't easy to win at. And they finish off the year against Arizona, who I had next here on the list. Arizona is very similar to Arizona State in that they lost – the defense is not good for that team either. And Arizona lost their running back, Kadeem Carey, but Rich Rodriguez had made that offense into a Rich Rodriguez offense. And that game, I would not be surprised if that game ends up being like 60-50, to be perfectly honest, because that weird things happen in that game, no matter where it is, Tempe or Tucson, and both the Wildcats and the Sun Devils, they got to win a lot of games based purely on their offense.
Right. That just looking at the Sun Devils though, that stretch in the middle of the season there.
Yeah,
that's a tall order to fill. I forget who we were talking about earlier. Right, so that's just a lot to ask. It was Stanford on the road.
Yeah,
this is probably even worse than that. This is just going to be. I don't know how any team, no matter how good they are, can go through that stretch and figure to win all 4 of those games.
Well, but on the other side of it, though, ASU had a similar stretch at the beginning of last year, where they played 4 or 5. I think 4 ranked teams in 5 weeks, and I remember looking at the schedule. If they can come out of that 2-2, I'll be happy with it. And I think they ended up coming out 3-1, and that kind of propelled them forward. I think the one loss was to Notre Dame, and that was a tight game in Cowboy Stadium. So I always have kind of a relaxed optimism for the Sun Devils because I know that they could lose these games, and they've done so in the past, where they see these big games, these big stretches, and they just haven't been able to man up to it. But that's a tough stretch for sure. But if they can win, if they can go 2-2, because they should be 3-0 when they get there, Weber State, New Mexico, and Colorado. But if they can get through that 2-2, and then they can finish up winning the rest of the games there and end up 10-2. That's a great season.
Yeah, because
that could put them in contention for the Pac-12 title game. But I think that stretch is even rougher than the one they went through last year.
And I'll just say this too, that I talked about how A&M would be out of the rankings by week 8. By the time we get to November 8th, and ASU is playing Notre Dame will not be ranked anymore. Because that's another team I look at. And I go, what are you seeing that I'm not? Because they're Notre Dame. They're Notre Dame, but come on. They're not very good. They're not going to be very good. And what's his name? Golson, I guess, is back this year. But I'm sorry. But anyway, the Sun Devils will be fun. That much we know for sure.
Yeah.
And
same with, as much as I hate to say it, Arizona, the Wildcats, they'll be at least entertaining.
Right.
I don't know how many games they're going to win because I don't think their offense is even as good as ASU's is. But that game down in Tucson on Thanksgiving weekend will be fun as always. And then the other 2 teams in the South, Utah. Utah should be better than they've been since they came into the Pac-12. They have Kyle Whittingham's a great coach. Their quarterback that they bring back this year, Wilson. He's a very good quarterback. He played high school just down the road here from me. I've just been disappointed with Utah's Pac-12 effort since they came into the league.
Well, it's a big move. I mean, they were in the Mountain West before that, or one of those smaller conferences. Yeah. It's an adjustment to move from what's essentially the MAC or the Mountain West or whatever to a big-time conference, and it's going to take a while for them to catch up.
But even worse than Utah is Colorado.
Whatever happened to them? They used to be pretty good.
Yeah.
But, it's just Well, it's just like any conference. I mean, you've got the haves and the have-nots, and Colorado is, wow, just nice uniforms. I'll say that.
Yeah, that's all they get. Speaking of uniforms, small changes here in the Pac-12. Arizona, they had to get rid of the gradients on the numbers because of an NCAA rule. Thank God.
Yes.
But somehow that gradient thing didn't stop this ASU's black jersey or the copper and anthracite jersey that they're pulling out this year.
I love the helmet.
No, the helmet's great.
Yeah.
I like the helmet a lot.
Yeah.
And the anthracite might be okay if it was white pants.
Right.
But supposedly these are just part of uniform options. This isn't a straight uniform. So they can mix and match these with anything. The problem is, as much as I love the helmet, they could only wear it with these jerseys because it'll clash with the gold,
right.
The regular yellow. But they've worked the copper into their scheme a lot better than Arizona did when they just pulled out a copper helmet for no reason.
Right.
Oregon is going to do what Oregon does,
Yes.
UCLA, they changed the numbers back to their regular numbers, thank God. But they still have the stupid tread mark pattern that Adidas is pulling out there and the tiny, tiny shoulder stripes.
I don't understand
and the
this.
LA Steel jersey.
Yeah, well, we don't even need to talk about that.
Which is supposedly midnight blue?
I guess.
Steel blue?
UCLA had, my God, they had one of the best uniforms in college football, and they just had to start messing with it. And not, which is bad enough. And then to go to these crazy dark blue uniforms and stuff that they've worn over the years, and now the LA Steel uniform, whatever.
Yeah. Utah, probably the most interesting move. They have this uniform where there's the mountains on the shoulder caps of the jersey, which it's an interesting look. I don't know. I don't really know what to think of it, really.
What do you think it's going to look like from the stands when you can't see it up close and figure out what it is?
It's going to look like nothing. It's going to look like white.
It's just, I don't know. Some of the, I mean, again, we could do 7 shows on college football uniforms and never run out of material. There's just some really, really bad design stuff going on, but it's become where let's just do it because we can do it. But the last thing we needed was a tribute to the old Utah Jazz uniforms with these mountain ranges on the sleeves.
In Washington, I don't know what they're doing with this little gold notch on the numbers. They have these weird shoulder cap patterns, too, that don't make a lot of sense to me. They got the shoulder caps and these little triangles that stick into the middle of the jersey.
Yeah.
And the purple jerseys have black shoulder caps. And the black looks awful in their scheme in the first place.
Right.
But
Washington's another team that could look really good if they would just quit messing around. If you're looking at the same picture I am, the second to last uniform going towards the right, not bad. The white wouldn't be bad if they take a few things away. But I can't stress this enough. The black is just so played out and so over and so tired. Why bother?
Yeah.
But
they've brought it. They've gone through a number of different uniform iterations since they first introduced the black, but they keep bringing it back for some stupid reason.
Black it's not part of their color scheme, and they just need to leave it alone.
Yeah.
Then you've got Oregon here with the wear white, wear yellow, wear green, wear black, and you don't know what they're going to wear.
Yeah. But when it comes to the Pac-12 as to who's going to win it, God, I really want Stanford. I really want to pick Stanford out of the North, but I keep looking at that stretch of games, and I just don't know how they're going to get through that.
Yeah.
Oregon's still the class of the North when it comes to at least offensive production. And then in the South, I'm going to go with USC.
I think I'd have to agree with USC, yeah.
I mean, obviously I love the Sun Devils. I love their offense, but they don't have the defense to stick with it. I think UCLA is just overrated. And I think USC will probably beat UCLA in that game, and then USC will get to be the representative there. And Oregon probably beats USC in the Pac-12 title game if I had to pick something right now. But
I'd have to see them both play first, but I'd have to agree with you right now. But I think USC is going to be a very interesting football team this year. Very interesting. And I'm with you. I think they win. I think they win it too.
With all the ranked teams in the Pac-12, 6 ranked teams here. Any chance for 2 Pac-12 teams in the playoff?
None. Not with the schedules they have to play now. There's just no way because you're going to get I don't know how they can end up with two teams with only one loss, or like say one undefeated and one with one loss. I just don't see that happening.
Yep.
There are just too many tough schedules and too many bumps along the way. There's not only do you have the ranked teams, you've got the Oregon States that can come out of nowhere. You never know. It's just I just don't see it.
Now, if I were to pick a conference out of the Power 5 conferences where the conference champion, I don't think the conference champion I could see a situation where that conference's champion is left out of the 14 playoff. It might be the Big 12.
Yeah.
Or Big 12/10. The 10 teams of the Big 12.
As opposed to the 14 teams of the Big 10.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. We'll start with the highest ranked team there in the Big 12 right now. Oklahoma, number 4. Oklahoma obviously getting a big buoy from that beatdown of Auburn or Alabama in the Sugar Bowl.
Right.
They're having some issue with the running backs, a lot of off the field issues, some academic issues, a rape allegation.
Oh, good.
That's leading to one of their running backs being out for the season. But Trevor Knight comes in as the quarterback. He was the guy that stepped in for that Alabama game and played tremendously well. And the Sooners, only 2 ranked games on the schedule right now, both at home against Kansas State and Baylor. And, of course, they play Texas at the Fairgrounds in the Red River rivalry, as always. And they host Oklahoma State in the Bedlam game this year.
I'm sorry. I'm not buying Oklahoma for a second.
Neither am I.
I can't do it. First off, yeah, they beat the daylights out of Alabama last year in a game that Alabama would have just assumed been staying home playing PlayStation games. They didn't care. They didn't want to be there. And in no universe is Oklahoma better than Alabama. So if that's what got them to this ranking, wow, there are some really dumb people out there doing this voting. But I don't buy it. It's not really a serious test on their schedule that I can see here.
No.
Maybe Kansas State. I think Baylor's ranked too high. You're right. These guys could be left out of the playoff picture. The only thing that might save them from that might be the Big Ten. But I just don't see it. I'm sorry. I'm not buying Oklahoma at 4. I just can't do it.
Yeah, I agree.
A lot of offense in Oklahoma, but it's just...
There's a lot of offense all over the Big 12, though. The Big 12 has never been known as a defensive conference.
Not in a long, long time, no.
No. I mean, that's especially true with the second-ranked team here. Number 10, Baylor. Bryce Petty comes back as the quarterback for the number 1 scoring team in FBS last season, putting up 52 points a game. They have some inexperience and lack of depth in the secondary. But, again, not a tough schedule. They go to Oklahoma. They host Kansas State and Texas. But, again, all these Big 12 teams, I'm just not – yeah, Baylor can score a lot of points. And, sure, Oklahoma has the name recognition. But I don't see a lot out of this Big 12 conference.
I mean, and the thing is, too, here is that I don't know what Texas is going to be this year, but they might turn out to be pretty good. And not to say national championship or playoff caliber good, but was certainly good enough to win that conference. And it just, I guess if I had to pick a difference between Oklahoma and Baylor, it would be the fact that Petty's coming back, so they have experience at quarterback, whereas Trevor Knight played, that would be the difference. But I don't think that if you're the SEC or the Pac-12 or maybe even Florida State or maybe even the Big Ten, you're not really too much worried about any of these guys from the Big 12. You're just not. Yeah. They don't scare anybody. They'll score a lot of points against each other, but I don't see it.
Kansas State's the other ranked team, number 20. I just don't know too much about Kansas State, to be perfectly honest.
They'll be well coached, that's for sure.
Yeah, but
nice uniforms, and if everything holds to form, they will be great until they have to play Oklahoma.
Yeah, they'll trip up though. The lower end of this Big 12 is easily trippable. You mentioned Texas. I think Texas, despite not being ranked, they are number 24 in the USA Today poll. But I think Texas has the capacity for a big bounce-back season.
So do I. I agree.
Charlie Strong, his first year as the head coach there. David Ash is going to be the quarterback there as he takes over for the final McCoy to finally go through the Texas system.
Which McCoy is this?
That was Chase McCoy last year.
Okay.
Was it Case McCoy? Whatever.
Case, or was Colt Case, and is that it? Are we out of McCoy at this point?
I think we're out of McCoys.
Okay.
No more real McCoys. Texas has an interesting schedule. Like we mentioned, they play UCLA in what's essentially a home game in Cowboy Stadium. And I think if they could get to that game and potentially upset UCLA, that's something that could spring them forward into their Big 12 portion of their schedule, and they can make some noise. I mean, they host Baylor. They not technically host Oklahoma. And they go to Kansas State later on the year, but if they can avoid the pitfalls that this Big 12 schedule might hold, I think Texas can be right back in there. Because, I mean, the last season was so embarrassing for that team that there's nowhere else for them to go but up.
Yeah, I mean, if you remember right, they just got their brains beat out by BYU. Yeah, remember that? And that's just not supposed to happen. But looking at the Big 12, okay, I'm not sold on Oklahoma. Baylor, we know is going to score a lot of points, but I don't know that that's going to be enough. If I had to pick a team right now and say, okay, who's going to win this conference? I think I like Texas the best, because they've got good running backs. They've got Brown and what's the other guy's name? Joe Bergeron are pretty solid running backs. They're Texas, so they're going to have players. They're going to have talent, and I'm just not sold on anybody else. So I like the Longhorns, like you said, to make the comeback. I'm going to even go a step further and say they won the conference.
But there's also the situation where I think if Texas wins the conference, Texas isn't playing for the national title.
No.
I don't see them putting Texas in the playoff. Maybe because of name recognition, and if they go undefeated, they have to be, I guess.
Yeah, and it'll depend on how they do. I mean, if they just trounce everybody, you got to give them some consideration, you know. But it's going to be interesting. What's going to be interesting about this playoff is where the Big Ten and the Big 12 fall in this thing, because let's be honest about it, they're a half a notch down from the other three conferences.
Right.
Maybe not top to bottom.
We're gonna get Florida State.
Right.
We're gonna get the SEC champion and most likely the Pac-12 champion.
Right.
So we'll talk about the Big Ten in a second, but they've had some hits when it comes to their top contenders.
Yeah.
And the Big 12, just like we mentioned, isn't really great. So if there's a second team that comes out of that shows themselves to be worthy out of either the Pac-12 or the SEC, because I don't see it coming out of the SEC, I could see a situation where there's two of one of those other conferences and the Big 12 and Big 10 get left out in the cold.
It's certainly not impossible. Again, it's going to take a couple of things to break the right way, but Ohio, and we'll get to the Big 10 in a second, but Ohio State, when Braxton Miller went down, fell right out of the picture, I think. Michigan State's the best team in that conference. Now, I think they were before Braxton Miller went down, but that's another thing. But just, again, unless one of these teams, if Oklahoma, I don't see Baylor doing it. I don't see Kansas State doing it. Basically, it comes down to Texas and Oklahoma. If they can really put together a run, I can see them making the playoff. But if they come out of it like with 2 losses, there's no way in hell they're not getting in. Simple as that.
Oklahoma State, they haven't even decided on a starting quarterback yet, and that's usually an issue when your first game of the season is the number 1 team in the country, the defending national champions.
Yeah, that's a problem.
On a big stage at Cowboy Stadium. And the Cowboys also go to Kansas State, Baylor, and Oklahoma. So it's probably going to be a rough season there in Oklahoma State. TCU,
they'll put some points up. TCU will be, they're tough out, but
TCU still haven't decided on the quarterback either. And then the rest of the conference is Virginia Tech, Texas Tech, or West Virginia, Texas Tech, Kansas, Iowa State.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Not a lot. That's what I mean. There's just not a lot in that conference to really get terribly excited about. Yes. And the thing is, too, another thing that the Voiders are going to have to avoid when it comes to the playoff is being tricked by watching an Oklahoma or a Texas or a Baylor shred through that conference and make them think that those teams are better than they actually are. Because the competition level is just not there in the Big 12. Sorry, Big 12 fans, it's just the way it is.
Uniform-wise, the Big 12, they have a new logo, which, it's the same. It's a Roman numeral. And it doesn't tell you that even though that Roman numeral says 12, there is no hidden 10 in there anywhere. I don't. Why can't we just change them? Why is the Big 10 not the Big 14? Why is the Big 12 not the Big 10?
Brand recognition, simple as that. Because everybody, it's been the Big 10 your whole life, my whole life. It hasn't always been the Big 12, but that's what we know them as. So if you start switching them around, then people get confused. So you just leave it alone. And hopefully, I don't see the Big Ten getting rid of 4 teams, But I could certainly see the Big 12 picking up a couple to make it right. But it's going to stay that way because of name recognition, basically.
Yeah. We talked about Kansas's jersey that they unveiled, the red with the chrome. Not good.
The Flintstones
especially for a bad team, as they already are. Oklahoma has a couple alternate jerseys, which, guess what? They're basically the Washington jerseys in Oklahoma colors.
Right.
I like the white helmet.
Yeah, I like the white helmet a lot too, but I think the jerseys, and this is such a tired thing that I trot out, but they look like Walmart jerseys.
Yeah.
To me, they don't look top notch. Well, I do love the white helmet though.
TCU's new helmet's kind of neat. I like the chrome purple.
Yeah.
With the white helmet. And Texas Tech going to wear some 90s throwbacks, which they don't look like anything. They just say Texas Tech and have block numbers on them.
They look like the old Atlanta Falcons uniforms, kind of.
Yeah.
With the black and red. But I will say this, they're a damn sight better than what they usually wear. So there's something to be said for that, I guess. So I don't know why the Red Raiders wear so much black, but that's just me.
I've never understood that. Why not wear red jerseys?
I agree.
It's not hard. We'll move over to your neck of the woods, Greg. The Big Ten of 14. We're going to start with the team that's currently ranked number 5 in the rankings. But as I told you before, I think even if they win their first game in any sort of fashion, they'll probably still drop down. And that is your Ohio State Buckeyes. As you mentioned, Braxton Miller injured and out for the season. J.T. Barrett is the quarterback of record for the Buckeyes to start off this season. An interesting schedule, not terribly difficult, but they have some interesting meetings at Navy, at Maryland to welcome them into the conference, at number 8 Michigan State, which will probably decide the Eastern Division. And remember, in the Big Ten, no longer are they the legends and leaders.
Thank God.
There's now just East and West.
Thank God.
And of course, the yearly game at Michigan or against Michigan is at the Horseshoe this season.
It's going to be interesting. It all depends on how I don't even know his name, the other quarterback, J.T. Barrett. If he can, it's kind of like a Todd Beckman situation from the 2007 season where he was just a game manager and kind of let the rest of the talent do the work. If they can make a situation like that, maybe they still have a run at it. But when that was a different story back then. That was under Jim Tressel. That was under a more traditional offense. This is an Urban Meyer offense we're talking about here, so I don't know if J.T. Barrett can do all the things Braxton Miller can do. I'll tell you this, I wish we still had Kenny Guyton, who's now with a Canadian Football League team somewhere, but it's a real tough loss for the Buckeyes to lose Braxton Miller, and they've got Virginia Tech in the second game of the season, which Tech's not ranked, they're still going to be tough. It's just going to be they're going to need to just put it together and really run hard, and they've got to beat Michigan State, or they really don't have a shot at the playoff, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, this is a team, they scored the third most points in college football last year, and they're 12-2, 8-0 in the conference. They were still under the bowl ban last year, right? Or the postseason ban? No,
they lost to they played in the Orange Bowl and lost to Clemson last year. Buckeyes did. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. Well, then why was Michigan State the?
Because they won the conference championship game.
They beat Ohio State?
Yeah. Beat them. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's not included in the record. Okay, yeah, I forgot that for some reason. But
it's because it wasn't much of a game. That's why you forgot it.
True. And they lose Carlos Hyde, who probably could have been able to help them get through this. Do you think that were the backup running backs good enough to maybe kind of?
There's a lot of talk. There's a kid named Ezekiel Elliott that's supposed to be pretty good coming in. Mm-hmm. I can't remember the other one. There's 2 young running backs that they're very high on. And, it's college football. Anything can happen. But I tell you, losing Braxton Miller, especially when he was such a focal point of the offense.
He was considered the Heisman favorite, back in April or whatever it was.
Well, but the one thing about Braxton Miller, and this is maybe where J.T. Barrett, again, he might not be able to run as well, but if he can pass better than Braxton Miller, who knows? I'm just trying to be optimistic here, but realistically, when Braxton Miller went down, it kind of chucked any chance at a national championship right out the window. Now, the Big Ten's weak enough where Ohio State could roll through it, still maybe get a playoff bid, but I don't see them as being a serious – not that they were to begin with, but without Miller, I don't see them having really any chance of knocking off a Florida State or an Alabama if they get that far.
Yeah, the second-ranked team in the Big Ten and in the Eastern Division, like we mentioned, the Michigan State Spartans, Rose Bowl champions of a year ago. They beat Stanford. They make their money on defense and running the ball. Connor Cook was very, very good in the Rose Bowl, and if he can kind of parlay that into a good season this year, and maybe he can be effective and have a passing game for the Spartans. If he can run a passing game for Michigan State, that's going to put Michigan State on a track to probably go undefeated, and I think if Michigan State can do that sort of thing, they'll be the team that makes it the fourth team in the playoff easily. I even think that if Connor Cook can make a passing game for Michigan State, I might even put him as like a Heisman dark horse. Not necessarily somebody that could win it, but maybe get nominated towards the end of the year. But
yeah, because they're going to get a lot of attention because they're ranked high and all that. But I think going in, even before Braxton Miller's injury, because of that defense, I thought Michigan State was the best team in the conference. Mm-hmm. If they can put together any type of good, consistent offense, they're going to be a handful for anybody because they beat a Stanford team I didn't think they could beat last year in the Rose Bowl. They're going to be real tough, and that's the path to whatever you're going to get to out of the Big Ten goes through those guys. And if they can put together an offense, I don't see anybody else taking that conference besides them.
They have the one tough road game at Oregon in week 2. And, I mean, if they could go into Autzen Stadium and beat Oregon,
oh yeah,
then you might as well just shut down the rest of the Big Ten because they're going to just steamroll through the rest of it. And their other hard games, I mean, they get number 22 Nebraska at home, they get Michigan at home, and they get Ohio State at home.
Right.
So, I mean, unless they fall in some trap against Purdue or not Purdue, Indiana. Indiana's a decent offense, but they get the easy games with Maryland and Rutgers, and they're at Penn State to finish off the year, and maybe if they're undefeated and Penn State's on the rise again, maybe they could sneak up on them.
That's what I was just going to say. Of the games in that schedule that would worry me the most if I were Michigan State is that Penn State game could be a real battle for them. But Oregon, fortunately for Michigan State, that's not going to play a role in the Big Ten title. But if they get a win against Oregon, you got to start taking them pretty seriously.
Right, I think. Because that'll now vault them into the national conversation for sure.
Right,
and not already there.
Nebraska's a paper tiger. They're not as good as a 22 ranking. No. They're there because they're Nebraska. But Michigan's not going to be good this year, and then you've got Maryland and Rutgers who aren't good to begin with, and now they've got a Big Ten schedule to contend with too. So it's Michigan State's to lose basically, unless JT Barrett becomes the next Troy Smith or somebody, which I don't know. Maybe it's possible, but I'd seriously doubt it. But with Ohio State, with Braxton Miller being out of the way, it's Michigan State's to lose basically at this point.
Michigan, there in the East, Brady Hoke's got to be on the hot seat, right?
I would think so, yeah.
Do you think this is his last year?
I don't know.
Or do you see him pulling out something respectable?
It depends on what he does this year. It's just, he's a Michigan guy, and they're very big on that at Michigan.
Big on the Michigan man thing.
Yeah. And that probably gets him more chances than most would get. I say he's got one more year. If he gets in maybe an 8-9 win season out of this, he'll be okay. But if he comes in 6-7 wins, it's probably over for him.
Week 2, as we mentioned, is the last game against Notre Dame for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, so that's a shame.
That'll be something to watch, if not just for college football historians. Elsewhere in the East, Penn State, they get James Franklin from Vanderbilt, like we mentioned, as Bill O'Brien leaves for the Houston Texans. I mean, I've liked the kind of upward rise of Penn State. I like what Bill O'Brien did. It'll be interesting to see what James Franklin can do with that team. But they're still a year, 2 years probably.
I think they've still got sanctions to deal with too, don't they? It's still less. But I will say this, and I will give Bill O'Brien credit for this. The stain of that god awful situation it's faded faster than I thought it would. Not to say that it's gone, but it's not necessarily the very first thing you think of now with Penn State, which is probably good for the school. It's fading faster than I thought. I thought it would be years before they would be anything but, Penn State, that's where all the awful stuff happened. But it seems to be kind of fading away quicker than I thought, which is nice, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Indiana, their offense is good.
Yeah.
I like their wide receivers. They have an interesting offense.
Good running back.
Defense is still bad.
Yeah.
But
could probably
gone are the days where the game against Indiana is a bye week.
Right. They could make I could see them as they're probably a bowl team this year.
Mm-hmm.
But the Big Ten, God, I mean, I hate to beat up on my own like this, but there's just not a lot there.
No, and the other two teams in the East are the newcomers, Rutgers and Maryland, neither of which were very good last year, and neither of which I expect to be any better this year.
No.
Over in the West, number 14 is the Wisconsin Badgers. They're physical. They got a good run game, but they open the season against LSU and Houston, and then they host number 22 Nebraska, and that's all the toughness on their schedule.
That could help them a lot, actually.
They've got a very, very easy schedule.
They really do. It's a cakewalk after LSU, basically. Because where do they have? Is Nebraska at home? Yeah, after LSU, it's smooth sailing for them. They don't have Ohio State. They don't have Michigan. They don't have Michigan State. Or do they have Michigan? Nope. I mean, God, come on, guys.
Number 22 is the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Again, only 2 ranked teams on their slate. They're at Michigan State and at Wisconsin. Both those games they could lose. And honestly, I think Nebraska could just lose their opening game at Fresno State.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a rough place for any of the big teams to go, especially on the road in week 1. And Bo Pelini's time is kind of winded down in Lincoln, I think.
I'm wondering how many Nebraska fans would love to have Frank Solich back at this point. Because with nothing to work with at OU, he's made a pretty decent run down there. Mm-hmm. But I've been talking about teams that won't be in the rankings by a certain point. By week 4, Nebraska's not there anymore.
Oh, by week 3, Nebraska's not there anymore.
Okay, let me see. I didn't look at their schedule.
Oh, I didn't look at their schedule either.
Yeah. Because
they're number 22. They're right there.
I'll tell you what.
Trying to get knocked out.
I don't know. The Florida Atlantic's one of those weird teams, but I wouldn't be. Let me put it this way. I'm not predicting it, but it wouldn't shock me a bit if Florida Atlantic knocked off Nebraska. I'm dead serious.
Okay, well, Florida Atlantic, McNeese State, then they go to Fresno State, which hard.
That's going to be
play Miami.
Right, that's what I mean. They're not a number. First off, they're not number 22 even without the schedule. But then you throw Miami in there, Michigan State, Wisconsin. You're right. By week 3, week 4, they're out of the picture completely.
Northwestern is going to be interesting this year, if only because of the things outside. They were the team that put out the Unions last year. King Coulter, their quarterback, the leader of that movement. So it'll be I'm sure the joke will be made that Northwestern is more unified than ever. But it'll be interesting to see what the smart kids do this year in the Big Ten. I mean, they're not going to win any titles per se, but it'll be interesting at the very least.
They're going to be fun. They're going to be high flying offense and all that, and they'll make some noise here and there, but they're not a threat to win the conference.
The team I think that people may overlook, and I think people need to look at, if only because of the schedule and how it breaks down for them, are the Iowa Hawkeyes.
Yep.
You look at their schedule: Northern Iowa, Ball State, Iowa State, Pitt, Purdue, Indiana, Maryland, Northwestern, Minnesota, Illinois. They don't play a ranked team or a preseason ranked team until Wisconsin and Nebraska, number 14 and number 22, in the final 2 games of the year at home.
Looking at that schedule, the Iowa Hawkeyes
could very easily win those games and have the destiny in their hands for the final 2 weeks.
I was just going to say the Iowa Hawkeyes could easily be 10-0 by the time they get to those last 2 games.
Easily.
The only team, Indiana might be a handful because of the offense. Pittsburgh, God, I don't know. I don't think they're going to be very good. Iowa State's not very good. They could really, they could be 10-0. Northwestern might be a problem.
Iowa can still run the ball. I think the area of concern for Iowa is they lost their 3 main linebackers on defense, who, from what I read, they combined for a total of 1,000 tackles.
Wow.
So, that's a big hole to replace in the smack dab in the middle of your defense.
Right.
But if, Kirk Ferentz has been the coach there forever. They had the 9th best points against defense in the FBS last year. And just simply because of the way the schedule breaks, Iowa could be 10-0 just based on circumstance. And, maybe they lose to Wisconsin or Nebraska at the end of the year, but they're going to have every opportunity to win themselves the Western Division in the Big Ten. And
look at this, too. The 2 toughest games in their schedule are both at home at the end of the year.
Yep.
Nebraska is not going to be number 22 by November 28th. Wisconsin will probably still be in the picture. But, they've really got a pretty clear shot. If they can put together – you're right, they're going to be solid defensively. They can put together. They're like a mini Michigan State. If they can put together a little bit of offense, they could be a very interesting team to watch out of the Big Ten this year.
Elsewhere, Minnesota, Illinois, Purdue,
Illinois has what's the kid's name at running back? Is it Josh Ferguson? Is that right?
Sounds right.
And I guess this is a guy that I had on my fantasy football team, Wes Lunt. I guess it's supposed to be a really good quarterback at Illinois. So I think that's what he plays for. But who knows with the Illini? They're not another team that has really kind of fallen on hard times over the past few years. But the Big Ten, again, I just can't stress this enough. Just not a whole lot to look at there, really. Mm-hmm. So they could easily, barring if Michigan State. If they play the way they're supposed to, they probably make the playoff. But if a couple losses here and there, the Big Ten's on the outside looking in probably with this 14 playoff the first year of it.
Michigan State's the best hope to get to that championship game because Ohio State's going to fall off like we mentioned. Even if Wisconsin were to run the table and win the Big Ten, I don't see them as being national championship contender material. Even more so if our little dark horse Iowa goes through their schedule and makes it, they're not the championship material. So it's Michigan State or bust for the Big Ten's national championship hopes.
Barring some weird stuff happening in the other conferences, yeah. And now you could, again, if you come out of it, say if the SEC just really starts eating their young like they're known to do, then maybe. But it's going to take let's put it this way, a Big Ten team with 2 losses ain't getting in the playoff period. It's just not going to happen.
Nope.
And there's really no chance of 2 Big Ten teams getting in at all.
Uniform-wise, some interesting things there in the Big Ten. Illinois had their overhaul, and we talked about that on basically a sports show. It's okay. I'm not head over heels with it. I still think the I's in Illinois look like 1s. But what are you going to do? You mentioned bringing some color into the Big Ten. Well, Maryland's going to do it. You get to see Maryland's flag uniforms. Those will be fun. But then in terms of taking color out of college football, Michigan's going to wear those awful faux striped weird
I don't even get
jerseys.
What those are supposed to be.
I don't know, man.
I mean, I think somebody was it Phil Hecken, I think, said they looked like window shades.
Yeah.
This is a shame because one of the best football uniforms in football, period, are the Michigan Wolverines when they're just wearing their normal uniforms. I don't get the sudden fascination with taking the great uniform and messing it up, but I don't even get the stripes. I don't get it at all. I mean, they've done some cool alternates over the years, but this thing's just ridiculous.
Well, I think they like the alternate that had the stripes, and now they're trying to incorporate the stripes into other ways. Because, I mean, if you look at the shoulders, they're supposed to be blue and even darker blue beehive stripes on the shoulders. But
well, if you like the stripes from the other one, just keep that one because it was really nice.
In Michigan, I know you finally came into the 20th century, and you put lights on the stadium, but don't make a big deal about having night games.
Yeah.
Under the lights. That's when we're going to wear alternate jerseys. Like, everyone else plays night games, Michigan.
Right.
It's not special.
It's 2014, guys, and you're supposed to be one of the top universities in the country, and you're excited because you have lights.
Even the Chicago Cubs don't play up the fact that they
really
play under the lights anymore. And everything else is kind of normal. Michigan State finally got rid of the shoulder yokes on their jersey. Nebraska is going to have a dumb alternate jersey.
Oh, my God. This is just so awful.
Adidas, listen, Adidas, just me and you talking here, Adidas, nobody else. You need to stop.
Right.
You're not Nike. You're not even Under Armour. Stop trying so hard to be anything that Nike's putting out.
And if you're going,
because while Nike is crazy, sure, but Nike at least tries to make something look nice.
Well, yeah, and every once in a while,
throwing stuff on the wall and seeing if it sticks.
Right, and every once in a while, Nike will hit on something that actually looks pretty good. I don't recall Adidas in any of their efforts to do these crazy uniforms where we've ever said, wow, they did a nice job on that.
No, I think the only one that we could say that for is the Michigan jersey, or the other alternate jersey that they had. And that was only because they based it off of a throwback uniform.
Right.
Something that existed before. It's not something that came up out of thin air. So
I like Minnesota's gold helmet. That's going to look nice.
Yeah. And, 125 years of Buckeye football.
Yeah.
Greg, how was the first game in 1890?
I didn't go to my first game there until 1896, so I couldn't tell you.
Purdue's going to let fans put their face in the logo on the helmet.
That's kind of a cool idea until you realize that you're never going to be able to see it.
Right, unless you buy the helmet.
Right.
There's some minor league team that's having like a selfie night, and if you send in a selfie, they're going to make a jersey that's comprised of selfies as the jersey itself.
Okay.
So, I don't know. And Rutgers is bringing their stupid Black Knight crap into the Big Ten, so enjoy that.
I just don't know. I mean, other than the fact that it's the New Jersey and New York market, I don't know what the hell Rutgers is doing in the Big Ten.
Maryland's there because they get Baltimore and the rest.
I suppose. Yeah, I suppose. What's this?
But,
I thought okay, it was a false alarm. I thought Penn State putting numbers on their helmets. I thought that would have been kind of cool, but I guess they're not actually doing it.
No.
But
that is those are the Power 4 conference or Power 5 conferences.
I'd go more like Power 3.5, but okay.
Yeah, I mean, the ACC isn't the best from top to bottom. We outlined the Big Ten. The Big 12 is still the weak point, but it's going to go through cycles. The only thing that ever stays constant is the SEC. The Pac-12 is at a high right now. They're probably the second best conference in college football.
Definitely.
But they've had their down years too. The Big 12 had their big years with Texas and Oklahoma, and the Big 10, of course, has had their points. But it
was a long time ago, but they did have them at one point, I swear.
they did have them. But as far as predictions go, we made our prediction for the conferences. Bringing it all together, I think the national championship picture for me is probably going to be Alabama, Oregon, Florida State, and Michigan State. And national championship game, Florida State, Alabama, and Alabama or Florida State or.
I'm going to go. Okay, go 4 playoff teams we need to pick, right?
Yeah.
Florida State for sure.
Yeah.
Alabama.
Yeah.
I'm going to go off the board a little bit here. I like USC as my third choice.
Okay.
And number 4, Michigan State. National championship game. I'm putting Alabama in there. And
yeah.
I'm gonna really roll the dice here. I'm gonna say that Michigan State accidentally beat somebody in that playoff and ends up facing Alabama.
Okay.
So there you have it.
So you have Alabama winning the national championship.
Alabama demolishing Michigan State in the national championship game.
See, that's the thing that's interesting about the playoff is that you could have somebody like they accidentally win. As you said, they have like the Cinderella story where you win a game, but then you have to go play Alabama the next week, and you could get dump trucked. So, what's interesting in your example is, I mean, we talked about how confusing it is where these teams are going to go. I'm not even going to try to think of any of the other bowls right now.
Right.
But if you had a situation where USC and Michigan State both made the playoff, despite them, I mean, would the committee kind of play with the rankings to make Michigan State and USC play in the Rose Bowl?
I wouldn't be a bit surprised.
Or would they be on opposite sides and only one of them actually gets to play in the Rose Bowl, and the other team would have to play in the Sugar Bowl?
I don't know. I wouldn't be a bit surprised if they kind of tweaked it a little bit here and there.
It'll be interesting because it is still a committee and they're still trying to make money.
Right.
So I wonder if they'll. I mean, because we mentioned where they're probably going to try to not have 2 teams in the same conference if they could avoid it.
Right.
So I could see situations where people are still unhappy with it because, yes, while it is kind of a playoff, they're still treating it kind of like bowl games. So you're stuck in this weird area where you're trying to make money in ratings while also trying to make a competitive series of games.
Yeah, we talked about this on basically a sports show. I really think that the 4-year plan only lasts a couple of years. They're going to jack it up to 8 within the next 5 years, which I think is a good thing. Obviously, you're going to get some teams that probably, you go down to 8. Let's say the rankings hold as they are right now. Well, you've got UCLA in there at 7. They're not going to win the national championship. You've got South Carolina, Baylor in there, but
right. But if you made an 8-team playoff right now, and say UCLA's in there, and they would play Alabama in the first game. I don't expect them to beat Alabama, but what if they did?
Right, exactly.
What if they went on that Cinderella run and they beat Alabama, and they beat Florida State, and maybe they beat, and maybe they play Oregon or Oklahoma in the national title game.
Well, that's why we've wanted a playoff for so long, because now there's actually a chance. It's not completely determined by voters and just whoever ends up being 1 and 2 at the end of the year. Now there's actually a chance where you could get a Cinderella run like you get in the NCAA basketball tournament once in a while. Now, it's not as likely that an Ole Miss is going to jump out of nowhere and run the table, but it's still possible. With the top 8 teams, anything can happen.
Right. And I think 8 is good, because you look at 8, maybe at 9 South Carolina may have a shot at it. Baylor might have a say. Stanford might have a say. Georgia might. But I mean, these are all preseason, and you put it weeks down the line, and you never know. Right.
But I mean, I'm glad. I used to be absolutely against the playoff, and the more the talk, the hotter the talk got about it, the more I thought, it's ridiculous that they don't have a playoff. Not to mention just the barrels of money they're leaving sitting on the table by not having it.
Yeah,
it's going to be huge. I mean, it's really going to be something, because it's they finally have it. College football is probably the second most popular sport behind the NFL overall, and it's going to be huge. And I can't wait to see how it plays out. But again, I like I said, I'll take Florida State, Alabama, USC, and Michigan State. Michigan State accidentally beats somebody and ends up playing Alabama in the title game.
Yeah.
Who do you like for the Heisman?
Oh. If things go the way that I predicted, I would probably say Marcus Mariota.
That's who my pick would be too.
Yeah.
He's going to be he's kind of a different from the normal Oregon quarterback mold too. He's a little bit bigger, better passer, so I think it's his to lose. But you never know. We're a long way from November, so a lot of crazy stuff's going to happen, and it's going to be great.
And it all starts this weekend.
Yes.
It all starts this weekend. And I mentioned the games on Thursday. Arizona State playing Weber State. The big game, Texas A&M, South Carolina. Michigan State opens against Jacksonville State on Friday.
Oh, God.
Great. Other than that, I think, let's see, Texas A&M and South Carolina is one ranked team matchup. You have Clemson and Georgia. That's ranked team matchup, Wisconsin, LSU, and that's it when it comes to ranked teams playing each other in the first weekend.
That's still a little bit better than what we normally get at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, and you have USC playing Fresno. You have Florida State and Oklahoma State playing in Cowboy Stadium. Alabama's playing West Virginia in Atlanta, but that's not going to be a big deal. I think Ohio State's first game at Navy will be interesting.
They have a lot of trouble with that triple option offense, the Buckeyes do.
Right. And, I mean, they're still trying to adjust to life without Braxton Miller, and the Navy, maybe the triple option catches them off guard. Who knows?
Well, I think it was it 2 years ago, maybe 3, Navy came into Ohio State and damn near beat them.
Right.
So they have a lot of trouble with that triple option offense, and you're right, they're going to be reeling because they don't know what they've got with JT Barrett at quarterback. It'll be interesting.
Mm-hmm. And then on Sunday, SMU plays Baylor in one of the only college football games we'll see on a Sunday, because the week after that, NFL football kicks off.
Yeah.
We get to talk NFL next week.
Yes, we do.
But that's our college football preview. Kicking off of season 2 of basically a football show.
Yeah.
And with this coming up, we're going to be moving into year 3 of basically a sports show. How about that?
That's amazing to me. That's just blows my mind,
Yeah.
2 years going into our third year of it, yeah.
Yep. But
speaking of basically a sports show really quick, just to let everybody know, because of weird scheduling quirks and all that, we're going to take this week off from basically a sports show, but we'll be back next week.
Yeah, sometimes stuff happens. I mean, football season's kicking off, so Greg and I are busy on Fridays.
Yep.
I've got Tustin at Dana Hills this Friday.
John Hay at Amherst for me this Friday. I will be
Dana Hills, where my mom went to high school.
I don't know anybody that went to either one of these schools that I'm calling. I didn't even know John Hay. They're kind of like Presbyterian. I didn't know they existed until I saw them on the schedule.
Tustin. What is Tustin?
Beats me.
Tustin, I think, is the Tillers.
I know Amherst is the Comets, and they have when they wear their good uniforms, they look like the Packers, which is cool by me. I couldn't tell you anything about John Hay, but I have to learn about them between now and Friday. So
yeah, I know Dana Hills is the Dolphins, which led to one of the rivals of San Clemente High School. And a long time ago, I think when my mom was there, the students of San Clemente, when they were playing them during rivalry week, somebody got a dolphin that had washed up on the beach and stuck it up on the flagpole. But yeah, Dana Hills Dolphins, Tustin is the Tillers.
Okay.
Which, of course, strikes fear into the hearts of many.
Yeah, it's just as soon as you figure out what a tiller is. But
well, do you remember running back DJ Foster?
No.
He played at UCLA, played with the Carolina Panthers.
Oh, yeah, I do actually. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, he played for Tustin.
Okay, cool.
But that's it.
All right.
But yeah, football is here, and I couldn't be happier. I'm happy that we get to talk about football games.
Yeah.
I'm tired with football minutia and training camps and all that kind of garbage.
Yeah, the next conversation, I don't want to have to talk about Ray Rice or any of the other nonsense with the NFL. I don't want to talk about Jameis Winston and crab legs. I want to talk about actual football games because that's where the fun is.
Yeah, and it's here. You can follow us on our various platforms. Basically, a football show still has a Twitter, I assume.
Yes.
I don't know if it's used.
It hasn't been used since last year.
Well, the year is upon us. Follows a Basically a Sports Show. Basically Sports on Twitter, basicallysportshow@gmail.com. We're on Stitcher, we're on Spreaker, we're on Podomatic.
iTunes.
The Basically Empire still going strong on many different fronts. Mike and the Geek Show. Mike will make appearances here from time to time when his San Diego Chargers do something interesting.
Yes.
Which they could. They very well could.
Well, just real quick, I read an article today on Grantland that of the 2004 quarterback class, they're claiming that of that group, Phillip Rivers is the best of the bunch. Mike's San Diego Superchargers there. So.
I don't think I disagree. I think from a pure talent standpoint, I think Phillip Rivers is probably the best of that group when it comes into Eli Manning and Ben Roethlisberger. Now, of course, Ben Roethlisberger and Eli Manning both have 2 Super Bowl titles to their name.
Right.
But, if I have always made the argument that if Eli were in San Diego and Phillip Rivers were on the Giants, Eli would have 0 rings. Phillip Rivers would at least have 1. So.
Well, I wonder just how many, if Phillip Rivers might have had at least 1 ring if Norv Turner hadn't been the coach, or Marty Schottenheimer for that matter. But
that's true too.
That's for next week's NFL show.
Yeah, that's for the gods to decide. But Greg, any last words before we sign off?
I'm just glad it's here. I love college football, and I can't wait for it to get started.
Me too. That's it for. College football preview. We'll be back next week with the first weekend of college football and the preview of the National Football League. For Greg, I'm Zach. This has been Basically a Football Show. We will talk to y'all next week.